Dr. Kate Stephenson. She has over 25 years of industry experience and academic experience and a Stanford Ph.D. And she's a friend of InnovatorMD. She has done many talks with us and also has been instrumental in helping some of my companies through some of the difficult times of thinking about things and putting together the whole pitch and also uh, things that we don't know about, how do you get funding? How do you, which organization do you approach as far as research funding is concerned? And so she has been a great mentor for us. So we are happy to welcome her. Now she's a part of, I won't tell you, I'll let her introduce the company. So Kate, the stage is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Yuli. It's been great knowing Yuli over the last couple of years. Like it's 6 years now, 7 years. I think I went to the
Yeah,
first Innovator MD event in 2020.
yes,
And it's been, everyone knows, like 6 years is a lifetime in the industry or in a startup. So can everyone see my full screen?
yes.
All right, excellent. And just to say how much things can change how rapidly. So I joined Cern Corporation about a little over a year ago. And in that time, I also took on two faculty positions at University of California campuses, one of which is at Berkeley, where Hermione is doing her master's in translational medicine. So by the way, awesome to see you, Hermione. Hermione is a physician going Is There Life After MD in entrepreneurship. And so I said, you need to go meet my friend Yuli and show up at one of his events. And so one of the things I got to know was Cern Corporation, and I kind of started my career in the early 2000s in startups, took a bit of a break working with design and development, got a PhD, wandered along the way quite a bit. And just last year, I met this crazy CEO saying he was looking for a senior female engineer to work with a women's health company. And we met and we've been working together since. So Cern Corporation, what we're dealing with is vaginal infections. We have a microbicidal light treatment, no drugs. And my name is Dr. Kate Stephenson. My PhD, I'm PhD, not MD. And Greg Klang is our CEO. He's the one who's been steering the ship for over 5 years now. So what's the problem we're addressing? 32 million women every year will go to the doctor's office for a vaginal infection, either most likely fungal, so either a yeast infection, or bacterial, Gardnerella vaginalis. Those 90% of infections are actually those two little nasties. And it's one of those quiet, miserable things. Like you generally don't hear about this in the news. You don't hear it about in Hollywood, but literally, overwhelmingly, literally the number one or number two reason for a woman to go to the ER is actually an out of control vaginal infection. So very large problem, a lot of discomfort, not a lot of solutions. And part of the reason it's so miserable is because the whole pathway to treatment is just, rather inefficient at this point. So usually starts off with a woman starts feeling uncomfortable, has a number of known symptoms, itchiness, smell, discomfort, pain. We'll try some over-the-counter products. There's a number of antifungals that you can get for a yeast infection. Doesn't go away. Maybe she has a bad reaction to it, has to go into the doctor's office. Because if it's a BV, if it's a bacterial infection, those over-the-counter products are not going to work. She shows up at the doctor's office, hopefully hoping for treatment. Half the time you go to the doctor's office, you walk out with the wrong drug. So doctors, there's almost a 50-50 chance of getting the wrong diagnosis when you go into the doctor's office. But you won't know that until another week or two of trying to go down the pathway of treatment, even if it is a bacterial infection and you go on antibiotics, or it is a fungal infection and you go on antifungal, may not be the right pathogen. We have a number of emerging drug-resistant strains for both yeast infection and for bacterial infections that current mainline treatments don't deal with. So you end up in a potential cycle here where you eliminate some of it. Sometimes we call it we end up destroying a lot of the native flora that's in the vaginal area that actually prevents these infections while you're trying to treat the bad guys. So you end up in this recurrent cycle. There are some women who are easily going up to 6 times a year back and forth to that doctor's office in never-ending cycles of treatment. And if we're talking about just the money side of this, we're talking about 113 million women in the US alone between the ages of 15 and 60. So like I mentioned before, 30 million are going to the doctors trying to get a prescription every single year. If we capture even 10% of that market, that is 3 million patients every single year. And the device we're looking at developing, our technology is both a device and a consumable gel component with over an 80% gross profit. Right now, we're looking at a potential billion-dollar market wholesale with even a 10% penetration in just the US. So what is Cern developing? We are developing the first effective non-drug treatment for vaginal infections. What do you do when drugs don't work? You go to a medical device. So this is a vaginal device and a gel system. Think of it like an ultrasound probe and gel. It's not a drug. It's not a combination product. It is a device that we are looking at introducing as a prescription product, but it is for home use. We have early data showing that this is especially compared to drugs, very nascent technology, very low risk, allowing women to do this therapy safely and at home. Not only that, it treats yeast and bacteria. You do not need a diagnosis to use our product. 90% of the time, it's going to be something our device can treat. And that includes drug-resistant strains that the mainline drug therapies cannot defeat. Not only that, we're talking about as a device, we are looking at a potentially telehealth enabling technology. This is a device that we can actually use to connect ongoing infection management. You're looking for potential emerging symptoms, such as progression to a UTI, potential other treatments you may need to go into that could complicate the therapy. And best of all, we've actually treated about 60 women so far with our first generation product. Excellent 100% safety data, emerging great efficacy data, and this was first time out. We're still dialing in our dosage and our overall use paradigm. So how does it work? So we are dealing with reactive oxygen species. This is not ultraviolet. This is visible spectrum blue light. If you go into an operating theater, if you go into an airplane, you may see the bright, deep, intense blue. That works over 12 hours. We have a photosensitizer gel that takes the same effect, breaks it down to about 15 to 30 minutes. This is something that is proven safe on human tissue. So this type of response, it's very pathogen specific. You have to absorb it in a certain wavelength. You have to have a certain type of mechanism internally, which it just turns out the nasty yeast, the nasty BV that we're dealing with, it is highly susceptible to this blue light. And not only is it susceptible to the main line, I mentioned before, C. albicans, C. glabrata, C. cruce. These are the ones that if you go to the OBGYN conferences, they are scared to death about because these are not responding to the mainline treatments. And we're showing over 6 log reduction in the pathogens in our lab studies right now. We have about 3 years of lab studies trying under multiple variations and conditions to try and validate this information. And one of the things we want to point out is this has a lot of reproductive health. So you're dealing with a lot of infection management during the childbearing journey. That includes during fertility, IVS. You end up having an active infection, you miss your window for your implantation. You miss your active infection, you miss your window for your egg harvesting. A lot of the antifungals and antibiotics, they're contraindicated during that first trimester or they're expressed in breast milk. These are very nasty drugs, most developed over 40 years ago, that you don't necessarily want to complicate with your child. Not only that, those poorly managed infections, if you don't manage them, they have direct outcomes on infant mortality. Women will also suffer more from these infections during pregnancy. Over a third of women will encounter one of these infections actively during their pregnancy. And we're talking about addressing antibiotic resistance. One of the things I learned while joining this company is we talk about population resistance, all those nasty bugs out there that eventually develop drug resistance. You as an individual, as a young woman who may start taking antibiotics for infections as a teenager throughout her pregnancy and on through menopause, where there's a new additional risk, you may eventually develop to the point that antibiotics do not work on you. And so what we're seeing is middle-aged and older women who are now just not responding to the mainline treatments for the yeast infections they've had for 30, 40 years. So the nice thing about microbicidal light is it's multi-target, non-specific. It damages multiple areas of DNA within the pathogens, which means there's no single point mutation that could build up a resistance to it. So this is a platform play that we're building out to. So initially we have our first Gen 1 product that's going to be going through the FDA right now. We are looking at submitting a breakthrough designation very quickly, followed by a full designation for our Gen 1 device. This is a product, it's a tethered product, but it does the therapy. No bells, no whistles, nothing fancy, but it works and we're going to get into the hands of the doctors. However, we're also rapidly moving into and developing our Gen 2 product, which is going to be a full commercial, wireless, at-home product that will be able to be used at home for over 2 years to address that recurrent population or even potentially prophylactic use. And then finally, we have a connected platform where we're dealing with large health systems. Again, this is one of the most common infections that women go to the hospital for. You imagine a large scale health care system, they are managing thousands of these visits every single year for nothing more than 5 minutes with a doctor that easily with our device could have been managed remotely. Where we are right now, we're about 1.2 million in on 4 years of microbiology, animal safety, cell and tissue toxicity, IRB approval, FDA pre-sub, 8 patents, and actually it's 60 subjects in our human pilot study so far. Where we are now, we are doing a $3 million seed round to see us through that FDA approval. So I am literally the VP of engineering. I am setting up our quality system, freezing that design to go into our pivotal trial. We're going to be establishing our quality system, getting all of our verification and validation done, and then producing those clinical units that are going to get us to that FDA submission. That FDA submission, for all those startup people out there, that's a major point where you can go out and raise your Series A, get the next round of funding to get us to that next gen product. We have an amazing team right now, primarily based in Southern California. So Greg Klang's our CEO and founder. He worked with the LA BioStart program and part of UCLA or UC Irvine to spin this out. Melanie Santos, our chief medical officer, she's the head of Urogyn at Providence Health, actually oversees several hundred OBGYNs. There's me, faculty, Stanford, Ph.D., but 20 years of practical bench experience in developing technology. And Hansuk Park has actually done all the microbiology over the last 4 years, but is currently the chair of microbiology at Cal State LA. We're also met by David, who's ex-FDA, as well as a full suite of very senior names in the space. Annette Walker is the president of City of Hope, very large organization in Southern California. We have David LeGroux, chair of maternal fetal health at the Hoag. David Powell is ex-J&J. Jack Sobel is actually the #1 name in this entire field. So he is very excited about this technology. We use a quote from him that says, we talk about running out of arrows in the quiver. When he talks about as a doctor treating these infections, coming up with more drug-resistant pathologies, he's excited about our technology because this is something that it's one more arrow in the quiver when he's seeing these extreme cases, these women who aren't getting better. As well as we have Todd and Nalima, again, large number of senior leaders joining in on us the journey. So happy to take questions or move on and let the next startup jump in as well and then answer questions at the end. But my name's Kate Stephenson. I'll be dropping my LinkedIn and my email in the chat for people to follow up with me later. Happy to introduce you to our CEO and talk further. And I have no idea if I kept that to 10 minutes or not, but I hope I did.
Perfectly 10 minutes. 10 minutes,
Excellent.
30 seconds, but that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. You can take the presentation off. Okay. Wonderful invention. I think this is amazing. Whenever it is non-drug, non-invasive, home use, I think it's a win-win-win situation. Whatever you guys are coming up with. So here's the question. So it doesn't need a prescription, am I right? Or does it?
No, our current commercial plan is this is one of the most common questions we've gotten is people
Yeah.
come in saying, can we go over the counter with this? Yes, that's one path. For now, we're keeping with prescription. We're seeing it, especially as our beachhead market, we're dealing with those really nasty cases, which means we're starting out at the OBGYN offices. Southern California actually has one of the highest density of OBGYNs in the country. So great place to have a product like this. But definitely we are seeing it. How do you scale it from there? How do you make this accessible both in the US and internationally, especially in countries that may not have access to drugs? So a lot of potential pathways to go forward this, starting off with prescription until we can get the data for the FDA to really allow this to either be over the counter or a fully telehealth solution. We are a de novo regulatory pathway because, as I said, first device in the drug space. So we're really de-risking the therapy and then seeing where we can go from there.
Yeah, yeah. Is there, well, I have many questions. Let me, by the way, if anybody has questions, please raise their hands.
This is the first time Yuli's heard me pitch the company, so he probably has tons of questions.
I know, a lot of questions. What would be the, eventual, ultimately, how much would it cost for a person to buy this? What's the ballpark?
So in the US, we're looking somewhere around the $250. So 2-year durable good, long-term device. This is something that if you're highly recurrent, you have it in the drawers. Eventually, first off, it's going to have to be pay out of pocket, but we're already looking at our reimbursement strategies. When I talk to you about women looking at their overall risk of obtaining an infection that is drug resistant, there's a lot of payers out there who they realize like, okay, we're feeding antibiotics, antifungals, antifungals. Then these women come into their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're now having to escalate care. And so being able to cut that in and start introducing people to these things earlier, we really see the value is going to be coming out pretty quickly. However, I showed you that small, simple tethered device. We're looking at a very low cost of goods for potentially international markets, where this is just a device we talk about like you could power it with your phone. So literally
Yeah,
you sell the actual device itself for about $5, and you have something that potentially could be widely available to a lot of international markets.
yeah, yeah. I can see that. Now, is there, well,
Hey, Gary. I think
hey,
we've got a question from Alana here.
yes, Lana, go ahead. Ask the question. Unmute yourself and ask.
Hey, sorry about that. So, the safety profiles that you're talking about, I probably missed some of it because I joined late, but what data do you have in terms of any kind of long-term issue with tissue degradation for, especially if you're talking about, let's say it's a first encounter for an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old mom, and this is, got this potential that you're saying to give her a lifetime of, less antibiotic and antifungal use, and so less drug resistance over time. But what are we looking at in terms of, real data regarding how it's affecting her vaginal mucosa? And especially for women who get things like rectoceles or prolapses, that tissue's really thin and friable, right? So,
Yeah. So right now we're doing a massive optimization study to drive this down as low as possible. First thing, we went to blue light. There's a number of technologies out there, they're using UV. And we'll look like that's inherently, if we can do it with blue, we don't want to do it with UV. Second, we're just driving down the overall energy. There are a number of very well qualified ISO standards for radiant damage to mucosa, skin that we're definitely going to be way below. The other thing is that we actually have done both extensive lab studies for all kinds of all the, unfortunately, this is where the CEO could rattle off the long list of all the lab studies, but we have also done sheep studies. Will this be long-term 2-year use, studies? That's still to be emerging, but all the existing say that this is, especially compared to the existing antifungals that are out there, very safe. And we're even looking at potentially moving it into, that's why we're focusing on a lot of vulnerable populations. For example, we're looking at like oncology, where women end up getting yeast infections all the time, but you do not want to give them necessarily an antifungal that has a high renal impact. So, still developing. Definitely don't want to start off with the pediatric market, although I've had moms already approach me about their daughters they've got daughters who've got recurrent infections. And, same thing. I had sons who had nonstop ear infections. Giving them a new antibiotic prescription every other month was just not good. And the data is showing up that that's not going to be sustainable moving forward.
Great,
thank you.
great.
Very helpful.
Yeah, this was the question. How is the pharmaceutical industry looking at this? Are they interested in devices that can help prevent drug-resistant infections?
That's
Have
an
you had any
interesting
contact?
question.
Have you
So
had
we
any
have not had
contact?
much contact with pharma. I do know that there is very little innovation in the space. And most of doctors, I'm sure many of the doctors on the call could probably speak to better as to why it's so hard to get a new antibiotic or a new antifungal right now. It's heavily antifungal, so dealing with a completely disruptive new technology, is pharma looking at it? We're definitely identified all the companies that are potentially in this space, and are they going to want to move to it? I put my engineer hat on and go like pharma companies don't have ISO 1345 quality systems and don't necessarily have the device background and training to be able to adopt a device. Might they partner with our technology? Possibly. Because a lot of times we may come up with a UTI where we're saying like, hey, like we can work in the vaginal vault, the common,
Yeah.
initial development that they would have to go back for antibiotics anyway. So those are those kind of partnerships. We're definitely seeing this product as it's another arrow in the quiver. It's not going to replace every existing product out there. We're just going to have more options because we're realizing, women's bodies are very complex. very personalized. And so finding out what works for each woman's body, personally, and just giving them more options.
Yeah, yeah. Gary, you have your hand up. Hey, by the way, Gary,
Yeah.
congratulations, on Uber Doc. Gary
Oh,
was
thanks.
an
It
early
was
investor.
funny, Uli. Paula called me today with an earful. I'll call you later and tell you that. And
Yeah,
I'm
she
like,
called me
Paula,
too.
focus. You started a company, you exited the company, and it's done on IPO. That's all that's important. Um,
Yes.
so Kate, good to see you. So this is fascinating that you mentioned the blue light. So let me give you the
Yeah.
reason that it's fascinating. So I think, as you all know, I started a dental network and a dental fund
Yep.
also in parallel. And I've been doing due diligence on a number of companies. Well, there was this one company, and I'm a former dentist, right? It was
Mhm.
27 years ago, but still, um, it was a electric toothbrush that emitted a white light and a blue light. Okay. And it's like the Philips toothbrush, it's no different than that. But, and the price point was about the same. But their claim is that the white light actually activated hydrogen peroxide for whitening, but
Okay.
the blue light killed bacteria in the periodontal pocket, the appropriate, you
Hmm.
know, caries and periodontal disease, causing bacteria. And I was like, your first response is, yeah, right, okay. So what I did was what I do with a lot of things. I'm sure Yuli, I'm sure Kate, you do this also. I said, you know what? This sounds great. Send me a brush. Okay. And I actually separated it out on my end because I didn't want to combine the whitening and the bacterial aspect
Hmm.
of it. So in the morning, I would do the whitening toothpaste with the hydrogen peroxide, but in the evening, I would use the regular dentifrice, whatever Colgate, Palmolive, whatever it was, and I used the toothbrush. I did it for 3 months. Okay. Now it's hard for you, because I have pretty good oral hygiene to begin with, but it's hard to, assess. But what I did was I went for my quarterly uh, dentist and dental hygienist
Hmm.
cleaning and, kind of an evaluation. And I walked in the door and this is what I said. I said, I'm doing something different. And again, I'm a dentist, so I'm a little crazy probably anyway about what I do. I said, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. I said, but I want you to give me my normal exam and measure all my pockets and look, for the usual things that you look at and tell me at the end of the exam whether it's different. And I told this to my dentist, who's a prosthodontist, right? I said, don't tell your hygienist. And her hygienists are superb. So I go through my whole exam. And at the end of the exam, the hygienist is looking at the EHR and my previous exam. And she's looking at the results. And I said, so what do you think? She goes, I don't know what you're doing. She goes, but your gut, your is so much healthier than it usually is. And I tend to make a lot of calcified plaque. It's just my genomics, right? And she goes, you have no plaque on the sublingual part of your lower arch. She said, this is like the best exam you've had looking back in years. And I just looked at her and I said, let me tell you what I'm doing. And I told her, and I was just blown away by the whole experience. Yes, it's an N of one, but at the end of the day, it's not very
Yeah.
complicated. I think that the oral one person, and that's especially when it comes to caries and light, because then when you extrapolate it to what you just talked about kind of working with the pharmaceutical companies, well, they're a chemical, industry, which, and this is a light activated solution. And at the time, again, married to an obstetrician, being an obstetric anesthesiologist, I started to think, well, gee, this must have some application in the vaginal mucosa and for vaginal, bacterial
Hmm.
diseases and viral, and other diseases. So it's fascinating to hear you say that because, the oral cavity and the vaginal cavity are not very different conceptually when it comes to bacteria and when it comes to disease and all
Interesting.
of that. Really fascinating to hear that.
Yeah.
that you're
So
looking at
I have a
the
feeling
time?
like part of the reason I feel the device, we're about in the next 5, 10 years, we're probably going to see an explosion of blue light. We're going to see a lot
Yeah,
of companies. Hopefully we'll get some science along that actually proves it works as well. But I
right,
have a whole presentation I talk about, like, 5 years ago, we couldn't have done this company because just the technology wasn't, the LEDs weren't there, the infrastructure wasn't
right.
there. And so, yeah, I totally expect to see, Cern as a company, we've got to move fast because we're going to have a lot of follow on IPs. We got a good IP, got lots of patents in place. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see it in toothbrushes, hairbrushes, underwear, everything under the sun. So,
Well, right. And, there's a number of companies, including with what you're doing, that are using intravaginal kind of an insert of something for either urinary incontinence or yada, 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 and a lot of these same patients have other issues that they have to deal with. So it becomes also from a venture capital perspective, expansion of the idea. Let's say you start with vaginosis, or you start with urinary incontinence. And my question is always, well, how hard would it be to add like a blue light to the device to make it, more expand its use case, so to speak, since it's already going to be there for, let's say, urinary incontinence. So it's fascinating
so we
to,
got lots of ideas. Can't necessarily talk about them on a public forum, but yes, it's exciting. It's cool. And there's a lot of dental applications. So I
All
know
right.
I see we're already a half past here. So I don't know you if we want to let Nate jump on now
Yes.
or if we've got more questions.
Well, we'll wait for more questions later on, but